The messenger. The file's abrasive whisper against the 67 Mustang's flank was the sole occupant of the air in Arthur Bishop's immaculate garage. Sunlight flooded through the open portal, igniting motes of dust into miniature beacons of light in his personal haven. Dressed in faded denim overalls, a smudge of grease adorning his cheek, he presented a sharp departure from the bespoke suits that had once defined him, a past he believed firmly interred. Then, a shrill whine sliced through the stillness. Bishop straightened, his fingers automatically finding purchase on a nearby wrench. The sound intensified, solidifying into the unmistakable drone of a UAV. He scowled. Such contraptions were unwelcome intruders in his sanctuary. The machine materialized, a streamlined, obsidian quadcopter, its camera lens gleaming like a malevolent EYT settled onto the Mustang's hood with a muffled plunk. A small, metallic canister clung to its underbelly. Bishop advanced, cautious and alert as his hand closed on the cylinder. A digitized voice blared from the drone's speakers, shattering the quiet. Arthur Bishop, urgent directive. Global emergency in progress. Locate. Abruptly, the transmission died. The canister disengaged, clattering onto the paintwork. Before Bishop could react, it detonated in a brilliant flash and a thunderous concussion. The drone dissolved into a hail of sparks and mangled plastic. Staggering back, he shielded his eyes against the blaze, the pungent tang of ozone filling his lungs. Vision restored, he surveyed the damage. The Mustang's hood was a charred landscape. Of the cylinder, only a wisp of acrid smoke remained. Bishop raked a hand. Through his thinning hair, his mind churning. Emergency? Global. This was no mere message. It was a summons. His gaze fell upon the ruined metal, a mirthless smile twisting his lips. Retirement, it seemed, was a phantom. John Wick lounged in his library, a beam of afternoon sun gilding the time-worn pages of a Tolstoy first edition. The aroma of aged paper and treated leather permeated the space. A comforting salve for his world-weary spirit, he had carved out a semblance of tranquility here, a silent refuge where the encroaching darkness could almost be forgotten. Almost, but not quite. The serenity shattered. A high-pitched buzz, akin to an agitated hornet's nest, invaded the stillness. Wick's head snapped up. His gaze keen. He knew that sound. A drone. Uninvited callers rarely presaged glad tidings. Identical to Bishop's unwelcome guest, the drone drifted into view outside the window, its unblinking lens trained on him. It lingered there, a silent guardian. Before tapping lightly against the pane, Wick rose, his movements like liquid mercury, his senses escalating to full alertness with each stride. The drone retreated imperceptibly, hovering just beyond the glass. An identical metal cylinder dangled from its chassis. The same synthesized voice, devoid of warmth or inflection, echoed within the room. John Wick. Addressed specifically to you. Global crisis imminent. Discover. The voice was cut short. The cylinder plummeted, landing on the flagstones below. The subsequent explosion hammered through the air an instant later, turning the window into a shimmering cascade of fragments. Wick dove for cover, protecting his face from the flying shards. The chamber awash in the stench of burnt powder and scorched circuits, he emerged unscathed. His face a mask of grim resolve. The drone was annihilated, erased from existence. Only a blackened patch on the meticulously maintained lawn betrayed its presence. Global crisis, he muttered, his voice a low murmur above the lingering ringing in his ears. His hand drifted instinctively towards the Beretta nestled in his waistband. This was no random incident. Someone sought to capture his attention. They now had it. Hours later, Bishop was bent over his computer, the display awash with complex code and satellite imagery. He had managed to pluck a thread from the drone's disrupted signal, enough to pinpoint its point of origin at a secure server concealed within a derelict military installation in the Nevada desert. Hardly an innocent destination. Simultaneously, across the nation, Wick mirrored his efforts. He was perched in his darkened study, the sole illumination emanating from his monitor. He had penetrated the Continental Hotel's expansive network, circumventing its protective measures with practiced ease. The drone's trail terminated at the same locale. Nevada. Fragments of the puzzle were beginning to coalesce, though the complete picture remained obscured. Both men, acting in isolation, had been targeted. Both had received the same enigmatic warning. And both were being inexorably drawn into a conflict of far greater magnitude. A danger exceeding anything they had previously encountered. A bone-deep certainty settled within them. Their retirements were irrevocably over, and time, as always, was a dwindling resource. Hydra's shadow. Bishop watched Wick approach, his lean frame a silhouette against the flickering neon sign of the Zurich Knights Bar. Rain slicked the alley, reflecting the lurid glow in shimmering puddles. Wick's signature leather trench coat dripped, and his face, though stoic, held a weariness Bishop recognized. "You're late," Bishop stated, the gravel in his voice a counterpoint to the club's thumping bass leaking into the alley. Wick didn't flinch. "Time isn't a luxury we have." He pulled out a crumpled packet of cigarettes, lit one, and inhaled deeply. "So, you got something?" It wasn't a question. Bishop tossed him the mangled remains of the drone they recovered yesterday. This little bird was carrying a message. Encryption cracked. Payload was concerning. Wick examined the debris, his eyes narrowing. Concerning how? Think global-scale unpleasantness. And a deadline. Bishop paused, letting the words sink in. It mentioned something called Chronos and a device, codenamed Hydra. Wick blew out a plume of smoke. Hydra. Sounds charming. He crushed the cigarette under his heel. Let's hear the message. Back inside Bishop's makeshift lab, a sparsely furnished apartment above a kebab shop, the drone's decoded message scrolled across the screen. The language was technical, dense with jargon, but the intent was chillingly clear. Chronos, whoever they were, planned to activate the Hydra. The activation would trigger a series of precisely calibrated seismic events, essentially weaponizing the Earth's tectonic plates. The message concluded with coordinates and a date, 6 hours from now. Seismic. Weapon. Wick said, his voice low. Ambitious, even for lunatics. Ambitious and potentially devastating, Bishop countered. The coordinates point to a fault line that runs deep under several major cities. So, who is Chronos? Wick asked, already moving to a whiteboard covered in diagrams and maps. Bishop tapped a key, bringing up a complex network analysis he had pieced together from the drone's data fragments. That's the million-dollar question. They're well-funded, highly organized, and incredibly discreet. The message mentions a secure repository, a vault, containing the activation codes and the full operational blueprint of Hydra. Where? Switzerland. Zurich. A branch of Credit Suisse. Bishop pointed to a pin on the map. High security, obviously. Unlikely to be accessible through conventional means. Wick's jaw tightened. Conventional means aren't exactly our forte, are they? This vault. It's our only lead to shutting down Hydra. He looked at Bishop, his eyes reflecting a grim determination. We go in silent and fast, retrieve the codes, and scrub the blueprints. No collateral damage. Bishop scoffed. You're still clinging to that no collateral damage fantasy, Wick. We're talking about preventing a global catastrophe. Things might get messy. Messy is acceptable. Reckless isn't, Wick replied. His tone clipped. Bishop sighed, the familiar tension between them palpable. He preferred controlled chaos, calculated risks. Wick was all about precision and minimizing casualties. Different philosophies, same objective. Fine. Bishop conceded. But if we're going to pull this off, we need to trust each other. No holding back. No solo acts. Wick nodded slowly. Agreed. We're partners. For the next 6 hours at least. He picked up his coat. Let's go shopping. We'll need some specialized equipment. The rain had stopped, leaving Zurich washed clean as they stepped out of the apartment building. Bishop felt the familiar adrenaline surge. A potent cocktail of fear and anticipation. Hydra's shadow loomed large, and time was running out. The Swiss bank awaited, a fortress guarding secrets that could shatter the world. They had a long night ahead of them, vault of secrets. Under the anemic glow of a bare bulb, the blueprints looked amateurish, a child's crayon scrawl compared to the labyrinth they depicted. Wick traced a route with his finger along the air ducts. This is it, our only shot at bypassing the laser net. Bishop, ever the pragmatist, adjusted his calm extraction strategy. Same route, but with urgency. Wick's grin flashed, a stark contrast in the dimness. Think you can stomach a little squeeze? Inside the vent, the air hung heavy with grime and the coppery tang of aged metal. Bishop, despite his bulk, moved with surprising litheness, his silenced pistol snug against his thigh. The drum of his own pulse filled his ears, a constant reminder of the confined space. He could only pray the intel hadn't steered them wrong. 6 hours was all they'd bought that a sharp metallic tink ahead stopped him cold. He signaled Wick, who wormed forward, pressing an ear to the duct wall. Voices. Wick breathed. Murd. Sounds like Kronos. Bishop cursed silently. They were already on site. They reached their target. A maintenance hatch providing access to the vault's auxiliary control center. Wick coaxed it open with a miniature laser cutter, the whine a faint whisper against the bank's electronic thrum. The room was a clinical space, illuminated by the glacial blue of monitor screens. 2 guards, starched and alert, stood sentinel at a console, their gazes locked on the displays. Before they could shout a warning, Wick was on them. Whirlwind of precise violence. Bishop followed close behind. His own movements economical and decisive. 2 muffled impacts, and the guards slumped into oblivion. Key fragments in the main safe, Bishop stated, circumventing the security protocols with familiar ease. Let's move. The vault door loomed, a behemoth of steel and reinforced concrete that IT side open with a whoosh of pneumatics, revealing a vast chamber lined with safety deposit boxes, and awaiting them, bathed in the almost holy light of the inner vault, was Valkyrie. She stood impassive, arms crossed, her silver hair gleaming like polished chrome. 4 Kronos operatives, heavily armed, flanked her. I anticipated your arrival, she stated, her voice a flat, emotionless register. Your charade ends here. Always a pleasure, Isabel, Wick retorted, drawing his weapons. Though I must confess, your choice of decor leaves something to be desired. The air erupted in a cacophony of gunfire. Wick and Bishop dove for cover behind a row of safety deposit boxes. Bullets pinging off the metal. Valkyrie stood her ground, directing her team with icy precision. Focus fire on Wick, she barked. He poses the greater immediate threat. Bishop returned fire, providing a screen while Wick navigated the box maze toward the central safe. He reached it, a formidable structure at the vault's heart. Inside, amidst stacks of bullion and glittering gemstones, rested a small, intricately carved silver cube, a piece of the activation key. He snatched it up just as a Kronos operative rounded the corner. They collided, locked in a frantic struggle for dominance. Wick disarmed him, using the man as a human shield against the relentless barrage. Got it, Wick shouted, flinging the cube to Bishop. Let's blow this popsicle stand. They fell back toward the ventilation shaft access, laying down suppressing fire. Valkyrie watched them retreat, her face a frozen mask of fury. After them, she roared. Do not allow them to escape. They gained the hatch, Wick shoving Bishop through first as he followed. A bullet clipped his arm, sending a jolt of white-hot pain through the limb that he slammed the hatch shut, sealing it behind them. They scrabbled through the ventilation shaft, the sounds of the pursuit pounding in their ears. The air grew stifling. The space-constricting time was running out, bursting into the grimy alley behind the bank. They were greeted by the squeal of tires. Their getaway car, piloted by a contact known as Fingers, idled with impatient urgency. They scrambled inside, the car fishtailing away from the curb just as Valkyrie and her team spilled out of the bank's rear entrance. That was uncomfortably close, Bishop said, clutching the silver cube like a lifeline. Wick, cradling his injured arm, just grinned. Honey, the show's just getting started. Marrakesh pursuit. The G-force propelled them across continents. A blur of refueling stops, passport stamps, and snatched meals marked their passage. Rome vanished in a haze of exhaust fumes and hurried farewells. Next was Athens, then Cairo, each pit stop a fleeting glimpse of a world indifferent to their desperate race against time. Bishop, fueled by lukewarm coffee and adrenaline, spread tactical blueprints of the Marrakesh fortress across the cramped cabin table. Wick, ever stoic, monitored the aircraft's progress, his jaw clenched, a silent testament to the pressure mounting with each passing mile. They call it Khazar al-Hajar, Bishop said, tracing a finger along the fortress's imposing walls. The stone castle, built centuries ago, updated with every imaginable security measure. Wick glanced up. Impenetrable, I presume. Nothing is impenetrable, John. Only highly inconvenient. Bishop circled a cluster of buildings nestled against the western wall. The old servants' entrance, least guarded, but probably wired to the teeth. And the alternative? Bishop pointed to a high, narrow window on the eastern side. The ventilation shaft. Direct access to the central control room, theoretically. Problem is, it's a sheer climb and the exit is heavily monitored. Wick leaned in, his eyes scanning the blueprint. We'll take the ventilation shaft. More direct. Less time wasted. Marrakesh assaulted their senses the moment they stepped off the plane. The air hung thick and heavy with the scent of spices, dust, and exhaust. The cacophony of the marketplace, a vibrant tapestry of bartering voices and blaring horns, threatened to overwhelm them. They traded their tailored suits for jalabas, blending, or attempting to blend, into the teeming crowds. The ancient city was a labyrinth of narrow alleyways and sun-baked courtyards, a world away from the clinical precision of their previous lives. Bishop led the way, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. He navigated the maze-like streets with an unnerving confidence. His hand never far from the silenced pistol concealed beneath his robe. Wick followed, a shadow in his wake. His presence a silent promise of lethal force. As dusk settled, painting the city in hues of orange and purple, they reached the base of the fortress. The stone castle loomed above them, a silent sentinel against the darkening sky. The air was thick with tension, every shadow seeming to conceal a potential threat. The climbing gear is in the satchel, Bishop whispered, handing Wick a small, lightweight pack. Remember the plan. Get to the control room, disable the security grid. I'll meet you inside. Wick nodded, his gaze fixed on the ventilation shaft high above. He took a deep breath, the scent of jasmine and danger filling his lungs. Without a word, he scaled the fortress wall. Bishop watched him ascend, his heart pounding in his chest. The fate of the world, it seemed, rested on Wick's ability to climb a wall, bypass a security system, and disable a doomsday device. All before the sun rose, that he pulled the jalaba tighter around himself, melting back into the shadows of Marrakesh, ready to execute his part of the plan. The clock was ticking. Every second was a grain of sand slipping through the hourglass of their mission. The hunt was on. Fortress of sand. Sand, fine as powdered bone, coated everything. Bishop, goggles strapped tight, tasted it on his tongue. Even through the rebreather, he signaled Wick forward, his hand a silent claw in the dim light filtering through a crack in the fortress wall. The air hung thick with the smell of ozone and decay. Breach point secure, Bishop whispered into his calm, voice distorted but clear. Stand by for entry. Wick, a dark monolith against the sand-blasted stone, simply nodded. He shifted the weight of the modified H&K MP5 in his hands, the movement fluid and practiced, and no words. As always, just readiness. Bishop triggered the micro-explosive. The wall shimmered, then fractured inward with a muffled thump. A cloud of sand erupted, momentarily obscuring the narrow opening. Bishop adjusted his goggles and squeezed through, Wick right behind him. The corridor beyond was a claustrophobic maze of rough-hewn stone. Torches flickered in sconces, casting dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the hiss of their rebreathers and the soft crunch of sand underfoot. Chronos security protocols are primitive, Bishop muttered, consulting a holographic display projected onto his goggle lens. Pressure plates, tripwires, classic stuff. But don't underestimate them. Valkyrie isn't stupid. He was right. Barely 10 meters in, a pressure plate triggered a hail of crossbow bolts from concealed slits in the wall. Wick, moving with preternatural speed, deflected most with his MP5, the clang of metal on metal echoing in the confined space. Bishop took cover behind a crumbling pillar, returning fire with a silenced pistol. The corridor erupted in chaos. Two Chronos soldiers, clad in black body armor, charged from a side passage, weapons blazing. Wick moved like a dervish, weaving between the bolts and the gunfire, his MP5 spitting lead. Both soldiers went down in seconds, crumpling into lifeless heaps. Clear? Wick grunted, ejecting the spent magazine. They pressed on, deeper into the fortress's heart. Each room was a deadly puzzle. Pressure-sensitive floors that triggered poison darts, hidden blades that swung from the ceiling, and corridors rigged with tripwires connected to crude but effective explosives. Bishop disarmed them with practiced ease, his tactical mind dissecting each threat. Wick provided the necessary firepower, a silent guardian angel, eliminating any resistance with brutal efficiency. Finally, they reached a massive chamber, the air thick with the stench of stale sweat and fear. In the center, bathed in the flickering light of braziers, stood a figure clad in polished steel armor, a menacing halberd resting on his shoulder. His face was hidden behind a visored helmet, but his posture radiated arrogance. "You made it further than expected," the figure said, his voice amplified by the helmet's internal calm. "I am Commander Torvin, Valkyrie's right hand. Your little game ends here." Torvin lunged, the halberd a blur of steel. Wick met him head-on, his MP5 singing a deadly tune. But Torvin was strong, his armor deflecting the bullets with ease. He parried Wick's attack and retaliated with a sweeping blow that sent Wick staggering back. Bishop, meanwhile, circled the chamber, searching for an opening. He saw a weakness in Torvin's stance, a slight imbalance in his footwork. He fired a grappling hook at a nearby pillar, swinging across the chamber and landing behind Torvin. The fight became a whirlwind of steel and gunfire. Wick and Bishop fought as a single unit, each anticipating the other's moves. Wick's relentless assault kept Torvin occupied, while Bishop targeted the weak points in his armor, exploiting every opening. Finally, after a grueling exchange, Bishop managed to disarm Torvin, knocking the halberd from his grasp. Wick followed up with a series of rapid-fire bursts, shattering the visor and exposing Torvin's face. A mask of rage and desperation. Torvin roared in pain and fury, but it was too late. Wick finished him with a final, decisive shot. The commander crumpled to the ground, his armor clattering against the stone floor. Bishop approached the fallen warrior. His face grim, he retrieved a small, intricately carved amulet from Torvin's neck, another piece of the key. "One down," Bishop said, his voice barely audible above the hiss of their rebreathers. "One to go." Betrayal's edge. The air in the derelict textile mill was a stagnant blanket, punctuated by the occasional plink of dripping condensation. Bishop's flashlight slashed through the gloom, illuminating skeletal machinery and looms shrouded in thick webs. "All clear," he announced, returning his sidearm to its holster. Wick's movements were those of a seasoned hunter, senses at peak alert. "Too quiet," he breathed, his grip tight on the suppressed pistol at his side. A sudden surge of power flooded the cavernous space. Harsh fluorescent tubes sputtered to life, bathing the interior in a sterile, clinical light. Perched on a platform overlooking the floor, Valkyrie's lips curved in a chilling, predatory smile that sent a shiver crawling down Bishop's spine. She held a detonator. "Welcome, gentlemen. I trust you find the accommodations quaint?" Wick's expression tightened, his gaze laser-focused. Isabel, the utterance of that name, laced with disbelief and something deeper, caused Valkyrie's smile to flicker momentarily. "That name. It's shed skin. I am Valkyrie now, and I will dismantle your plans." "Dismantle us?" Bishop scoffed. "You're in league with them?" "I operate for myself," she corrected. "They offered what you never could, vengeance." She swept her hand in an arc. "You see, John, your focus was always the mission, blinding you to the fallout. You never tallied the cost of broken lives." Wick remained silent, his stare unwavering. The atmosphere thrummed with unspoken animosity. "Prague, John, does the name resonate?" Valkyrie's voice was laced with acid. "The Novak family? A child at play in the square? A bomb, misdirected." Wick's jaw clenched, color leached from his face. Bishop's gaze darted between them, confusion mingling with a growing apprehension. He had never witnessed Wick so affected. "That child was my sister, John," Valkyrie hissed. "And you were the instrument of her death, the one who planted that infernal device." The detonator trembled imperceptibly in her grasp. They exploited her memory to mold me into this. They play you too. Don't you see? That wasn't me, Wick stated, his voice a ragged whisper. That was before. Lies, she spat. They all peddle in lies. You were complicit. You were there. Her finger tightened on the detonator. Instinct propelled Bishop into action, seeking refuge behind a mountain of corroded gears. The mill became a symphony of destruction as explosive charges detonated along the support columns, showering the area in a hail of debris. When the dust cleared, Valkyrie had vanished. A ragged opening in the roof marked her escape route. Wick rose slowly, his face a canvas of pain. She's gone. No kidding, genius? Bishop retorted, spitting out a mouthful of grit. And she just bought them a significant advantage. What the hell was that all about? Wick remained unresponsive, his gaze locked on the hole in the ceiling. Bishop had seen him combat entire armies, face impossible odds, and never waver. Now, surrounded by devastation, he appeared, shattered. We need to move, Bishop urged, placing a hand on Wick's shoulder. The clock still counting down. Wick shook his head, as if to dislodge a persistent fog. She knows our strategy. She knows everything. Then we adapt, Bishop responded, his voice resolute. We always do. Yet even as he spoke, doubt burrowed into his confidence. This was no mere mission gone awry. This was personal. And that, he knew, rendered everything infinitely more perilous. They had squandered precious time and, even more critically, forfeited the element of surprise. The stakes had been raised to a terrifying new level. Hong Kong underworld. Hong Kong's electric dragon of neon signs slashed through the inky expanse. A cacophony. The sizzle of street food. The booming drama of Cantonese opera. A relentless chorus of taxi horns, slammed into Bishop and Wick as they exited the jet. The air, thick enough to taste, carried the cloying sweetness of jasmine, laced with a sharp, metallic tang reminiscent of blood. Delightful. Bishop drawled, adjusting his impeccably knotted tie. Wick, ignoring the jibe, scanned the vibrant crush of humanity. Whisper should be expecting us. From the gloom beside a noodle stall, a figure materialized. Lin Whisper Zhao, her expression an unreadable canvas of poise, offered a slight bow. Mr.Wick.it has been too long. Her voice, a hushed melody, struggled to be heard above the urban roar. Whisper, Wick responded, a fleeting warmth flickering across his features. I need your help. A key fragment. Kronos is also in pursuit, I believe. Her composure fractured, replaced by a sharp frown. Kronos? They sow only destruction. This will be complicated. The triads are tearing each other apart. She indicated a distant explosion that briefly painted the night sky in orange. Kronos has been actively pouring fuel on the fire. They squeezed into a dilapidated taxi, Whisper firing off rapid-fire instructions in Cantonese. The vehicle, like a mechanical eel, snaked through the labyrinthine streets. Inside, tension vibrated like a plucked string. Lay of the land, Bishop queried, his hand instinctively finding the reassuring weight of the Glock beneath his suit. Red dragons versus jade serpents, Whisper stated, her gaze flitting nervously. A decades-long standoff. Kronos armed them, fueled their territorial disputes. Now, it's erupted into open war. The city is splintering. The taxi lurched to a halt in a lightless alley. The air thrummed with the distant thump of gunfire and the squeal of tires fighting for grip. The fragment is held by a serpent elder, Whisper explained, guiding them deeper into the reeking passage. We need to secure it before the red dragons. Without warning, a storm of bullets tore through the air. They scrambled for cover behind overflowing dumpsters, the putrid miasma of decay assaulting their senses. Red dragons, clad in black leather and brandishing automatic weapons, emerged from the shadows. Kronos anticipated our arrival. Wick snarled, returning fire with lethal precision. Bishop, ever practical, seized a discarded wok lid, using it as an impromptu shield to deflect incoming rounds. Well, introductions are over. Let's serve these reptiles some hot lead. Whisper moved with surprising grace and ferocity, her slight frame a blur of motion. From beneath her cheongsam, she drew a pair of butterfly knives, their polished surfaces flashing as she engaged the red dragons at close quarters. Her movements were a lethal ballet, a whirlwind of steel. The alley transformed into a miniature war zone, a macabre dance of projectiles and blades. Wick, a figure of cold efficiency, became a phantom of death amidst the gang members. Bishop, surprisingly effective, despite his bespoke attire, provided covering fire and tactical guidance. Just as they gained the upper hand, a thunderous explosion ripped through the confined space. A grenade detonated near their feet, throwing them off their guard. Emerging from the smoke, Isabelle Valkyrie Moreau wore a chillingly satisfied expression. "Impressive, gentlemen," she purred, her voice laced with malice. "But your little game ends here." She raised a hand, signaling a second wave of red dragons to advance. Whisper, wounded but defiant, spat on the grimy ground. "Kronos filth. You will not prevail." Wick, shielding Whisper, exchanged a look with Bishop. A silent understanding passed between them. This was more than just a retrieval mission. This was a fight for Hong Kong's destiny, and they were caught in the crossfire. Meeting Bishop's resolute gaze, he resolved to fight, to claw his way out of this alley. They would obtain the fragment. They had no other option. Pacific showdown. The air hung thick with the smell of gunpowder and burning lotus blossoms. Whisper, a phantom in the chaos of the Triad Warrens, flicked a spent casing from her silenced pistol. "Got it," she hissed into the calm, her voice barely audible over the screech of warring factions. Jade Dragon's pendant. Last fragment secured. Bishop, dodging a stray bullet that ricocheted off a pagoda roof, acknowledged with a grunt. "ETA to the rendezvous point, Whisper?" He gripped the ancient compass, feeling the other two fragments hum against his skin. Together, they formed a perfect circle, the needle spinning wildly, finally locking onto a set of coordinates in the vast expanse of the Pacific. Suddenly, the alley fell silent, too silent. Whisper cursed under her breath. "Ambush. Valkyrie. I repeat, Valkyrie." Before Bishop could react, a flash grenade detonated, bathing the alley in blinding white light. That he tackled Whisper to the ground, shielding her from the worst of the blast. When his vision cleared, he saw them. Valkyrie, cold and implacable, flanked by Kronos enforcers, but it wasn't Valkyrie's presence that sent a chill down his spine. It was what stood behind her. Finch, pale and trembling, was being held at gunpoint. Beside him, bound and gagged, was their pilot, Maria, her eyes wide with terror. "Hello, Bishop." Valkyrie's voice was a silken blade. "I believe you have something that belongs to Kronos." She gestured towards the compass. "Hand it over, and I might consider letting your associates live." Bishop clenched his jaw. "You know I can't do that, Isabelle." He used her real name, trying to appeal to the sliver of humanity he believed still existed within her. Valkyrie's expression didn't flicker. "Don't presume to know me. Bishop.my allegiances are clear." She nodded to her men, who tightened their grip on Finch and Maria. "The clock is ticking. Make your choice." There was no choice. "Not really." Bishop raised his hands. Relinquishing the compass, Valkyrie smiled, a cruel, mirthless expression. "Wise decision." She snapped her fingers, and her men released Finch and Maria onto a waiting transport vehicle. "Where are you taking them?" Bishop demanded, his voice tight with fury. "Somewhere safe," Valkyrie replied, her eyes glinting. "Until you deliver the Hydra to Kronos. Then, perhaps, they will be released." The island was a jagged tooth of volcanic rock rising from the endless blue. The Kronos transport had dropped them at the edge of a black sand beach. The Hydra, a sleek, submersible drone, lay dormant in a crater, its metallic hull gleaming under the oppressive sun. "You disarm the Hydra," Bishop said to Whisper, his voice grim. "I'll deal with Valkyrie." Whisper nodded, her face a mask of determination. She pulled out a small, multifaceted device, a scrambler she'd cobbled together from salvage tech, and began to approach the Hydra, moving with the lithe grace of a panther. Valkyrie stepped forward, drawing a pair of curved blades that shimmered with an unnatural sharpness. "This ends here, Bishop," she said, her voice laced with a chilling finality. Your interference is over. Bishop mirrored her stance, drawing his own weapon, a modified Sauer P226, its matte black finish reflecting the harsh sunlight. He knew this was more than just a battle. It was a reckoning. He had to stop Valkyrie, not just for himself, but for Finch, for Maria, for everyone Kronos had hurt. This doesn't have to be this way, Isabel, he said again. Desperately, Valkyrie lunged, her blades flashing. It always was, Bishop. You just couldn't see it. The fight began. Echoes of the future. The numbers swam before Bishop's eyes. He stabbed a finger at the touchscreen. The glass slick with sweat .0-7-3-1. The fail-safe code. Hydra's countdown ticked relentlessly in the corner of the screen. Each second a hammer blow against his skull. Outside, he could faintly hear the muffled roar of Wick's battle, a symphony of destruction he desperately needed to ignore. Almost there, Whisper's voice crackled in his ear, a lifeline across the chaos. Just hold on. He entered the final digit. 9. A wave of nausea washed over him. He slammed his fist onto the enter key. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The countdown continued its inexorable march. Bishop braced himself for the inevitable, the fiery end of the world they'd fought so hard to prevent. Then, with a sigh that seemed to emanate from the very core of the machine, the countdown stuttered, stopped. The red numbers dissolved into a benign green. You did it! Whisper's shout was almost deafening. Bishop, you bloody did it! Relief flooded him, so potent it nearly buckled his knees. He sagged against the console. The cold metal a welcome contrast to the burning in his lungs. Not alone, he gasped. Couldn't have. Meanwhile, in a shattered hall, sunlight streamed through the gaping holes in the walls, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Wick stood over Valkyrie, her face bruised, her usually immaculate uniform torn. Her breathing was ragged, but her eyes still blazed with defiance. He held his sword aloft, the polished steel reflecting the harsh sunlight. He could end it here. End the threat, end the pain, end the cycle of violence that had consumed them both. He knew the stories of her past, the burning building, the lost family. He also knew the countless lives she'd taken since. Finish it, Valkyrie rasped, her voice devoid of emotion. Do what you came here to do. Wick lowered his sword. The metal scraped against the stone floor. I'm not like you, Isabel. He used her real name, the one she tried so hard to bury. The one that made her flinch. I won't become what you are. A flicker of something, maybe surprise, maybe even gratitude, crossed her face. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the familiar mask of cold indifference. He turned away, sheathing his sword. You'll face justice for your crimes, but I won't be the one to deliver it. Valkyrie remained on the floor, watching him go as he disappeared through the ruined archway. She closed her eyes. The world swam. The comms crackled again. Wick, Hydra is neutralized. Bishop pulled it off. Wick let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Good. Get him out of there. He paused. And see to Isabel. The line went silent for a moment. Understood. Later, under a sky bruised purple with the setting sun, Bishop and Wick stood facing each other. The air was still thick with the smell of smoke and ozone. Helicopters whirred in the distance, carrying away the wounded and the dead. You were impressive back there, Bishop said, his voice hoarse. With the numbers. Wick inclined his head. You held your own with the swordplay. A ghost of a smile played on his lips. Though I suggest practicing your disarms. Duly noted. Bishop managed a grin. There was a long silence, filled only with the distant thrum of the helicopters. Then, Wick spoke. It doesn't end here, does it? Bishop shook his head. Not while there are people like her, and worse. Then perhaps, Wick said, extending his hand, we should consider making this a more permanent arrangement. Bishop clasped his hand, his grip firm. I believe we should. They stood there for a moment longer, two men forged in fire, bound by a shared purpose. The world was safe, for now. But they both knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that the echoes of the future were already whispering on the wind.